is Lori Nearing, and I really appreciate you taking the time to come here this evening. This is being videotaped for future viewing by whoever would like to pull it up and watch it. We are also live on Zoom, and I just want everybody to be aware of that. So when you're speaking, you'll need to speak up a little bit, and the microphones in the front especially pick up our voices. So anywhere, I'm told by our wonderful IT person, Andrew, that if we talk between the pavilion here and over here, you'll be pulled in just fine if you speak up from wherever you're sitting. So, welcome tonight. Thank you very much for coming to this. I was wondering how many of you came to the very first PFAS forum we had about, 5 years ago in April. Some of you were here. Yeah, look at that. Awesome. Well, thank you for coming back, and thank you for coming to learn more about the PFAS issues and all the new things that are going on here. As a matter of housekeeping, I just want to mention that the restrooms are at the top of the stairs here. There is an elevator right up here. If you need the elevator, feel free to use that. And you can see the exits should there be any sort of emergency. There are also our extra chairs out there. More people come in and we would need those. So thank you. Got some odd things on the slides here. So they're seeing the whole presentation. So let's see. There we go. That looks good. There we go. So we're very honored this evening to have Senator Eldridge and Representative Dancina with us tonight. And they're going to be talking to us about legislative issues. Kimberly Abraham is here from DPW. She's the Superintendent of Water and Sewer. Dr. Laura Shader is somebody I've been working with extensively for this study. And I've just grown to realize how extremely knowledgeable she is on everything PFAS. She's told me numerous times that she can talk all day on PFAS, and she still has more to say, and it's always changing. Matter of fact, just this morning, when I pulled up my internet email, I got a notice that said that PFAS is on the inside of the wrappers for butter. And I thought that was like, do the right thing, don't get the plastic containers. And now I've been exposed to it through butter. So
recording in progress.
Okay. Thank you. Emily Heckel is here. She is the coordinator for the study here in Ayer. And you'll be hearing from her, and I'll do a brief closing at the end. So thank you all for coming tonight. Next slide. There we go. Most of you, I think, know about PACE, People of Ayer, concerned about the environment. We started this organization, or I should say we launched it in 1997. That was when the technical assistance grant from EPA was offered to the town of Ayer because of the Superfund site that is adjacent to Ayer from Fort Devens. And we took action on it. At that time. It was a landfill that we were concerned about. They were going to extend a landfill that would have ended up where Shepley's Hill landfill is, and that could have gone back to the town of Ayer. And so Connie Sullivan was working with us back then. Connie wanted back then, and he came up with the concept of don't dump on Ayer. And some of you may still have bumper stickers around that had that emblem on it. And we won that battle. We worked really hard for about 1.5 years, and the landfill was placed elsewhere. And actually those are the child with long hair there. That's my daughter. And she's now 32, so I've been involved with this for a long time. But PACE has done lots of other things. We've received numerous awards. We've received a technical assistance grant renewal a number of times now, well over probably $200,000 worth of work, and other grants from other places. We also worked on 211 West Main Street. That was the family business known as Video Star Store some time ago. There was a contamination issue from dry cleaning solvent. Family lost their business and became very sick from that. It's still an ongoing issue that I am concerned about. And a number of other issues. We worked also, the other main thing was the Guilford Auto Unloading Facility. It's 57 acres, was constructed right on top of our aquifer that is for Spectacle Pond, and we were not able to win that battle, unfortunately. So now we're involved in PFAS. That's our main focus. I became aware of PFAS issues somewhere around 2015 or 16. The Army started mentioning it to me, and I was going, oh great, another chemical. We thought we could retire at that point, but no way. Other things came upon us. And honestly, it took me about 2 years to start paying attention to what's going on with PFAS because it just seemed like another thing to deal with. And it wasn't until EPA offered a 2-day seminar, and they let us stay up in New Hampshire, and we heard from the voices of people who are very sick, firefighters in particular, from their vast exposures from PFAS. And so that's when Julie Cornswit, want to raise your hand? Julie and I have been involved in this forever. We became involved in PFAS, and that's when we started having our first forum. And that's when I met Laurel Shader, who came as our guest speaker to teach us about PFAS and the issues related to it. And around that time, we learned about the opportunities to become involved in the health study. Hyannis and Ayer in Massachusetts are both involved in this health study. And there are 8 other sites across the country. It's a big honor that we were selected to be part of this study. It's a really important research project that we're involved with. Next slide. We'd like to kick off this forum by giving this brief 12-minute or so video. They'll give you some good background on PFAS, so we're kind of all at the same place. And then I'm going to invite Laurel to come up and present some specific information about PFAS. So, I don't know if we need to turn the lights down, if we can.
We assume, of course, it's safe. Scientists are warning about a common and potentially dangerous chemical that can survive in the ground and in our water.
Had no idea the wastewater that the state licensed him to use to fertilize his fields was also swimming with potentially toxic chemicals called PFAS. Now, his land, his cows, and yes, their milk are all contaminated. PFAS is an acronym for a family of man-made compounds called per- and polyfluoroalkyl substances.
When it came out that there was...
We'll be going to Laurel's slides next. All right. So I grew up with Teflon pans because they were healthier, right? You didn't have to use butter and grease and oil to cook your eggs or whatever. Anybody else like that? Yeah. I remember buying Scotchgard for my brand new car because my kids were going to stain it. I sprayed my seats with Scotchgard. Well, I don't anymore, but you know, all these miracle products, these miracle compounds, they're in so many products, it's just pretty scary. So what we're doing with this health study is to help us connect possible health effects to our exposures. Most people have some level of exposure. It's really hard to find a place in the country that does not have some level of PFAS in it. I was paying attention to a study that was done in New Hampshire recently where they were trying to find a remote area somewhere in New Hampshire up in the mountains where there was no PFAS. And they looked at 100 different sites. All 100 remote sites had PFAS. So it gets into the rainwater. It's really quite a large problem. So one of the things we'll be talking about today is how do we deal with it right now? How do we start looking at ways to break this chemical down? There's a lot of research going on. How can we get this stuff off the market? And that's what our representative legislator will help us understand. So at this point, I'm going to have Laurel come forward. We are going to save question and answers until the second set of presentations. We'll queue when it's time. So you can just jot down any questions that you may have. For folks who are remote right now, I noticed there were a number of people that are listening remotely. You can type your questions into chat, and we'll try to catch those as well. So Dr. Laurel Shader is a senior scientist at Silent Spring Institute, which is based in Newton. Through her research, she's become a real expert at understanding how we are all exposed to PFAS and what that means for our health. She earned her bachelor's at MIT and a PhD at UC Berkeley. She's a lead investigator on the Massachusetts PFAS in Your Health study here in Ayer and in Hyannis. You'll hear more about that later tonight. So please join me in welcoming Laurel.
Thanks so much, Lori. And it was about 4 years ago, almost
couple of months that we met in this very room at your PFAS event, and that really did start a wonderful partnership between Silent Spring Institute and PACE. So thanks to all of you for coming on a beautiful summer night. Thanks very much to Senator Aldridge and Representative Sena for being here as well. So I really like to show that film at the beginning of events because it does really convey some important information about these chemicals, but also the different types of impacts that they've had on communities all across the country. So I'm going to spend the next 10-15 minutes here, re-emphasize some of the points from the film, and also talk about the health effects of PFAS, what we know, and some things that you can do as well. So before I start, I wanted to introduce you to Silent Spring Institute. For those of you who aren't familiar with our organization, we're an independent nonprofit research organization dedicated to understanding links between everyday chemical exposures and health, with a particular focus on women's health and breast cancer prevention. We were actually founded by visionary activists at the Massachusetts Breast Cancer Coalition almost 30 years ago, who were concerned about high breast cancer rates on Cape Cod and saw the need for more scientific research on environmental causes of breast cancer and other disease. And we continue to work closely with MBCC and many other advocacy groups throughout our research. So when I started doing this work on PFAS, it was back in 2009, there were not news articles every single day on PFAS. And now I always have to update this slide because there are always new articles that are coming out every day, every week about PFAS. So a couple of recent ones of note, there was a recent study by the U.S. Geological Survey that estimated that nearly half of public and private drinking water supplies across the country are likely to contain PFAS. There was work earlier this year by the State Department of Health finding PFAS in some ponds. Even in Walden Pond, PFAS levels in fish were of concern, so they issued fish consumption advisories. And I grew up in Concord, so that kind of puts close to home, and that's Henry David Thoreau's stomping ground as well. And then there's a lot of action, and I'll talk a little bit more about this, and we'll hear more from the legislators as well. There's a lot of action at the state level to restrict PFAS in products. And so there is a bill that's being considered right now, actually a couple of bills that are being considered in Massachusetts that you should all learn about and be aware of.
Laura, if we could stand behind the podium and that's
Oh. I'll stand over here. So quick primer, and I think in the film they did go over some of these things, but PFAS is an umbrella term, so it's not one thing. We actually don't know how many different things it is, but the current number that the EPA has on their website are over 14,000 different compounds. So it's not like lead, which is just one thing, or mercury. It's many different related compounds. They all have some chemical similarities, but each one is a little bit different in terms of their properties and their toxicity. They've been dubbed forever chemicals because they're extremely persistent. So when they get out into the environment, they basically never break down. But they do move around, as because they're in rain, they move through the oceans. They've been found in polar bear blood in the Arctic and in the blood of people who live in remote regions all throughout the world. So this really is a global problem. And you might wonder, like, well, why am I just hearing about this now? Like, I've been using Teflon pans for decades. They've been in use for so long. Why is this an issue now? And there are a number of reasons for that. I think a big reason is that it's just been in the past 5 to 10 years that scientists have been able to start measuring parts per trillion levels of PFAS in drinking water, and they've discovered that it's in water supplies everywhere. And I think the fact that it's in drinking water really hits home for a lot of people. And so that's contributed to this really big level of awareness and concern about these chemicals. I won't get too into the chemistry as much as I'd like to, but just so you can get a sense of, for those of you who do get a little bit interested in chemistry, the two of the most common PFAS chemicals are shown in that upper right-hand corner, PFOA, which is called C8, and PFOS. These two in particular have been phased out of production in the US, so the levels of these chemicals in people's blood in the US is going down. There is still some global production, and instead of phasing out the whole class entirely, industry has shifted to producing other PFAS, which raise many of the same concerns. If you'd like to learn some more about PFAS, I do recommend the film Dark Waters with Mark Ruffalo and Anne Hathaway about a community in West Virginia impacted by a DuPont plant. So how do we get exposed to PFAS? So PFAS are synthetic chemicals, so these are not naturally occurring compounds. These all originated from a 3M, DuPont, or another industrial facility. We can be exposed through consumer products, through touching them, through them ending up in the air and the dust in our homes. They can come into contact with food and enter our bodies that way. They're used in the class of firefighting foams. For those of you who are familiar with Ayer and Fort Devens, there's a plume of firefighting foams that contain these PFAS that is affecting some of the Ayer public wells. And Ayer is certainly not alone. There are many communities across the country where these firefighting foams have contaminated drinking water supplies. And then there's also a waste stream of PFAS from industry, from the products that we dispose of, from wastewater sludge that can contaminate the environment. And so we can also be exposed through food. Plants and animals can absorb PFAS from their surroundings, from drinking water, as well as from consumer products. And as we heard, PFAS are used in many everyday products. Some products with PFAS have names recognized: Vortex, Scotchgard, Stainmaster, Teflon, but many don't. People are often surprised to learn that Oral-B Glide dental floss is made basically with Teflon. They're in guitar strings, microwave popcorn bags, many other kinds of products. So we can take some steps as individuals to avoid them, but it's really impossible to avoid them altogether. So Silent Spring Institute has been studying PFAS in drinking water starting in 2009. We were actually the first to find PFAS in drinking water on Cape Cod. And I didn't know at that time that my work would really end up focusing so heavily on this one family of chemicals. Beyond drinking water, we've also found that PFAS are prevalent in fast food packaging. We've shown that people who eat more fast food, who eat more microwave popcorn, people who have stain-resistant carpets and upholstery in their house, people who use more Oral-B Glide dental floss do have higher levels of PFAS in their blood. So we know that the PFAS in the products don't stay in the products, they can end up in our bodies. And last year we led a study on PFAS levels in textile products for children and adolescents, and particularly products labeled as stain or water resistant were more likely to contain PFAS. So because of the extreme persistence of PFAS and their widespread use of products, it's not surprising that basically all of us are exposed to PFAS. Testing by the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention have found that over 99% of people living in the US have measurable levels of at least one PFAS chemical in their blood. Some PFAS stay in our bodies for a really long time. So the two that I mentioned earlier, PFOS, PFOA, they can stay in our bodies for years. So even if you stop getting exposed to any more of these chemicals, it will take years for the amount in your blood to even go down by half. And then that same amount of time for it to go down by half again. The newer PFAS that I mentioned that are being added to products, a lot of them haven't really been tested for the amount of time they can stay in our bodies. From what we do know, some of these newer ones stay in our bodies for weeks to months. So industry likes to point out that's much less than years, but it's still an extended amount of time. And so it is still really concerning that these chemicals can accumulate in our bodies in that way. And you might be wondering, so who do we know has higher levels? Are there any patterns that we can see? Certainly people who work with PFAS-containing products, so firefighters can be exposed through firefighting foam, as well as from the protective gear that they wear. They can have higher levels of exposure, as well as people who work in industries related to PFAS. Older people tend to have higher levels because we do accumulate these chemicals in our bodies over time. And men typically have higher levels than women. PFAS bind really well to proteins in our blood, and so women do lose PFAS from their bodies during menstruation. Unfortunately, we do also pass along PFAS to our children during pregnancy and breastfeeding, so that means that women's levels go down, but it means that babies are born already with PFAS in their blood. All of this is concerning because what we know about PFAS has shown that exposures to PFAS are linked to many different types of health effects. PFAS exposures have been linked to increased cholesterol and increased risk of obesity, immune system suppression, so lower antibody production following routine vaccinations. And when I started this work, people weren't really thinking about antibody levels and vaccinations, but with COVID, there are people in PFAS-impacted communities who have questions about whether their PFAS exposures may be in any way affecting the efficacy of the vaccine. It's still too early to know whether that's the case. There has been a study to show that people with exposures to one of the newer PFAS chemicals seem to have more severe symptoms of COVID. But it's a really active area of research, and some of the regulations are based on studies showing that this type of immune system suppression can happen at really low levels of exposure. Many other systems in our body can also be affected by PFAS, including the thyroid. There are effects on reproduction, decreased fertility, high blood pressure during pregnancy. There are developmental effects, so small decreases in birth weight and changes in bone density. For us as an organization focused on breast cancer, we're concerned that PFAS can affect mammary gland development and impair lactation. So we think that these chemicals also may be playing a role in breast cancer. And high levels of exposure to PFAS have been linked to other types of cancer like kidney, testicular, and prostate cancer. So when people get their blood tested for PFAS, maybe as part of a state study or as part of a health study such as ours, a common question is, well, what do I do with these results if I know what the levels are in my blood? And I wanted to bring your attention to a report published last year by the National Academies of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine. And it was really the first time that a national authoritative body had come up with recommendations for how to interpret results of PFAS blood tests. And specifically, based on the levels of PFAS in a person's blood, they came up with some different recommendations for different types of health screenings that physicians may want to prioritize for people that have had the highest exposures. So there's a lot of PFAS research going on, and I could probably have a few slides of sort of high priority areas, but I'll just mention a few so you can get a sense of the types of research that are underway right now. So what we know about PFAS toxicity, most of that information is focused on a relatively small number of PFAS, mostly these long chain legacy PFAS compounds. So there's really a lot of emerging information about the toxicity of the newer replacement compounds. Some of these are just shorter chain versions of the long chain ones that have been phased out, and there are other types of chemistries as well. The early evidence we have is that these newer PFAS chemicals raise many of the same health concerns as the older ones that they've been intended to replace. There's a lot of focus right now on firefighter exposures and understanding the extent of elevated exposures that firefighters may have, and as well as other workers. There's been increasing awareness of the potential for PFAS to be in plastics. For instance, certain plastics are treated with fluorine gas to make them more inert, and that can inadvertently lead to the formation of PFAS in the plastics. We've thought a lot about exposures from drinking water, and there's been a huge emphasis on testing and treating for PFAS in drinking water, and that's absolutely an important first step in areas where water supplies are contaminated. But communities are also realizing that their fish may also be contaminated, and so there's really a lot more work that needs to be done in order to understand the types of fish that are most likely to have PFAS, and to really think about the elevated exposures that may be occurring, especially from freshwater fish. And then it's very important that communities like Ayer are putting in place treatment, and we'll hear more about that from the Ayer Department of Public Works. The treatment to remove PFAS from drinking water, though, doesn't degrade the PFAS, it just gets them out of the water that people are drinking. So there's a need for more research on new technologies, not only to get the PFAS out of the water, but to safely and sustainably break down those PFAS so they don't get out into the environment or cause additional exposures. So sometimes it can all sound bleak. It's a really big and complicated problem. So you might be wondering, what can I do about it? So there are some things that we can do as individuals to reduce our personal exposures or our family's exposures. For instance, selecting carpets and upholstery that aren't treated with stain-resistant coatings. Avoiding microwave popcorn. I learned how to make popcorn on the stove. It's not hard, and it actually tastes better. Eating more fresh foods. It reduces your exposure to chemicals from the packaging that can leach into the food. Minimizing contact with fluorinated ski waxes. And if you live somewhere where your water does contain PFAS, or maybe a private well, filtering your drinking water, remove those PFAS. I wanted to give a shout out to our Silent Spring Institute's Detox Me smartphone app, which provides tips for reducing your exposures not just to PFAS, but many other everyday chemicals of concern. The PFAS exchange is a product of the PFAS Reach study, which Silent Spring is also leading, that has fact sheets, interactive map, and tools for interpreting PFAS water and blood testing results. For another project I'm working on with the University of Rhode Island, there's another set of resources for understanding and interpreting information about PFAS. Maybe that's my cue to wrap up. And then there are things we can do as individuals, but then there's really a community level effort that we can all take as well. If you can let retailers know, hey, I'm buying, 2 minutes. I'm buying your product because I know it doesn't have PFAS. It's nice for them to hear that. Or I'm not going to buy your product anymore because I just learned that it is PFAS. A lot of the action that's happened with respect to products not having PFAS anymore hasn't happened because of regulations. It's happened because of retailers being responsive to consumers. So you have a voice as a consumer. There's a lot that needs to be improved about how we regulate chemicals here in the US, and there needs to be more testing for safety before chemicals are widely put into production. And that all relates to the amount of influence the industry has more broadly in politics as well. Sharing what you learned at events such as this with people that you know about how they can also avoid toxics. Staying up to date about state and local legislation. We're going to hear some of that update right now. And finding out about local organizations in your area like PACE that are working on PFAS and other toxic exposures. And here are some resources that we can email out to everyone as well if you are interested in learning more about PFAS. So with that, for another talk that I gave, they wanted me to say something about what motivates me for my work. So the picture on the top there are my 2 kids. So they provide huge motivation for my work and really wanting to protect future generations from toxic chemicals. And that's a picture of me basically standing here. So thanks so much again for coming.
So we realized that we're supposed to be sitting here so people at home can hear us. So that's why we kind of moved around a little bit. Thank you, Laurel. And just to make it clear, in case you weren't clear on this before, Ayer was one of the first towns to filter fully for PFAS. It is not in our drinking water anymore. And we can thank our amazing DPW department for that, as well as this town who voted unanimously to spend the money to put in the filtration system when we first realized it. And I think that's it says a lot for our town. It took us all, and I'm really delighted for that. We're going to turn next to our elected officials here. They have these amazing bios, so hang on, I'm going to read you a couple of interesting bios for both Senator Eldridge and Representative Senna. So State Senator Jamie Eldridge has served as State Senator for Middlesex and Worcester District since January 2009. Representing 12 communities in Metro West. He serves as the Senate Chair of the Joint Committee on the Judiciary and the Senate Vice Chair Joint Committee on the Environment and Natural Resources. Yay. As an activist legislator, he proudly serves as the Senate Chair of the Criminal Justice Reform Caucus, the Medicare for All Caucus, and the Clean Energy Caucus. On Beacon Hill, Senator Eldridge focuses on increasing investments in public education and transportation, combating climate change, making health care a right, stimulating the economy, advocating for affordable housing, reforming our criminal justice system, advancing campaign and ethics reform, protecting the environment, yes, supporting immigrants, making government more transparent, and updating our election and campaign finance laws. He grew up in Acton, and he now lives in Marlborough with a dog, as I understand it, right? Previously, Senator Eldridge served as a state rep for the 37th Middlesex District for 7 years. He's a graduate of Johns Hopkins University and Boston College Law School. Prior to this work, he also worked for the as a public interest attorney with Merrimack Valley Legal Services in Lowell, which is a nonprofit organization that provides free legal services to the poor and the elderly. What more can you ask? My goodness. And I'd also like to read what Senator Representative Dancina State Representative Dancina has to say. So Dancina is our state rep for the 37th Middlesex District. His given name is Danilo, but he goes by Dan. Sina is the first Brazilian immigrant to be elected as a state legislature in America. Before his election, Dan was Senator Eldridge's district director for 6 years, working to protect immigrant rights, ensure healthcare access, make progress towards racial justice and climate change. Now Dan is continuing the fight for these issues and more in Massachusetts House of Representatives. Dan grew up in Brazil. He moved to the United States when he was only 14 years old. He went to school at Acton Boxborough, where I believe you live now in Acton, where your family goes to school. He received a degree in political science from UMass Amherst. Dan's goal is to represent our communities and work together in unity to make positive changes. Dan hopes to make Massachusetts his home, the 37th Middlesex District, a better place for us to live now and for our children into the future. He is on the Joint Committees on Education, Public Safety, and Homeland Security, Advanced Information Technology and Internet and Cybersecurity, and Consumer Protection and Professional Licensure. Please join me in welcoming Hope.
Well, thank you so much, Lori. Good evening, everyone, and thanks everybody for attending. And the picture that was up, I think of Laurel presenting in 2019, and picture of you. I remember being here as well. Of course, that was before the pandemic, and I really appreciate Ayer's leadership on taking the lead on addressing PFAS and forever chemicals in Massachusetts. From my bio, you know that I represented now the Neshoba Valley area for now this is my 21st year as a legislator, as a state rep and a state senator. And I just can't thank enough PACE and Lori's leadership and Julia's leadership and so many other members of PACE for all of the incredible work on some of the challenges this area has, from responding to the closure of the U.S. military base, to Shepley landfill. I know you mentioned was it the Pan Am rail company with what they unfortunately built over one of our water resources here. To I remember the West Main Street video store as well, and how concerning it is. So it really is. It's concerning that unfortunately PFAS is also a real issue of concern here, but to what Lori said and what Laurel said, I really appreciate Ayer's leadership to take quick action, including its residents in town meeting, and obviously to organize forums like this. Representative Sina and I have attended other forums in other communities, but really appreciate pulling together this forum. And just thank you so much to Dr. Laurel Shader and all the work of the Silent Spring Institute. And I know Silent Spring has been at the State House a lot to talk about a lot of water issues. As you can hear from Lori's introduction, I've been very involved in environmental issues. I work both for former State Senator, Environmental Secretary Bob Durand, and Pam Reeser, my predecessors. And I did co-chair a Water Infrastructure Finance Commission to look at, one of the main sort of solutions, I would say, to addressing the fact that PFAS is in most communities is getting more state investment in water infrastructure, including to build more treatment facilities. Ayer has done that, but not every community has done that. And then, of course, if you think about the communities, the more rural communities that are on private wells, that's equally concerning. So the state really needs to step up its sort of funding, not to mention the federal government. As a result of the ARPA law and the bipartisan infrastructure law, the federal legislation that happened last session, there has been a lot more money that was sent to Clean Water Trust that did provide either grants or loans to water districts or to cities or towns to build new water treatment facilities. In many ways, the Senate district I represent is a bit of sort of ground zero for PFAS, because not only this area, but I also represent the Mass Fire Service in Stowe, and a lot of that land, because if you listening to the presentation about, particularly where PFAS was used, is in that foam for initial efforts to stop fires and the training of all the firefighters across Massachusetts, which happen in the Stowe area. So very high levels in that area as well, and really most of my communities. In terms of the action that's been taken, beyond, I'll talk a little bit about the bill that was filed, but I want to reassure you that the DEP, the Department of Environmental Protection, took very quick action, action ahead of the EPA several years ago to limit the amount of parts per trillion of PFAS in our water system. They took early action, they've taken subsequent action as well as the EPA has taken action. But obviously, the damage has been done, and this study that's going on in Ayer is so critical. I know the signs are all over town. I really appreciate Lori's work and Pace's work to get more people who've lived, many years here in Ayer to sign up for that study. So that's really critical. Ayer is one of just a handful of communities across the country that are doing this study. So don't have to tell this audience, but please do what you can if you've lived in Ayer for that long period of time to take the survey. And beyond sort of regulatory action and that additional funding I talked about, there is legislation that is pending in the legislature this session. What happened was last session, there was a PFAS task force. It was chaired by Representative Kate Hogan, who's a state rep from Stowe. So as I represent Stowe in the Senate, she represents Stowe in the House, and then Senator Julian Sear in Cape Cod, where there's also been a real exposure of PFAS. They co-chaired the task force, and they came out with a number of recommendations, and then they filed this legislation. So the legislation is Senate 1356, House 2197, an act to protect Massachusetts public health from PFAS. So straightforward title. And what the bill does, and I will say, I appreciate the work on the bill. I also, some of these dates, I do wonder if perhaps we need to be a little more aggressive, but some of the parts of the bill bans adding PFAS in food packaging, children's products, car seats, personal care products, cookware, fabric treatments, carpets and rugs, upholstered furniture, and firefighters' personal protective equipment by January 1st, 2026. So again, I do wonder if we need to take quicker action on that, but it would ban those chemicals, the forever chemicals. It bans PFAS in all products by January 1st, 2030. It requires DEP to limit the industry discharge of the PFAS to groundwater and surface water. So that's really, really critical. You think about, some companies that are, of course, discharging water as a matter of the course of their business, requiring DEP to limit those discharges to prevent the greater presence of PFAS in our water supplies. Bans the use of PFAS containing firefighter foam for testing or training purposes. I mentioned the Mass Fire Service in Stowe, why that's such a high concentration there. It does create a PFAS remediation trust fund to help communities test and treat for PFAS in soil, drinking water, and groundwater. So that's really critical. Obviously, the community is less well off. It's harder for them to raise that money locally, and that's really where the state, again, needs to step up and provide more support. And then the last, speaking to the fact that often environmental justice communities, less well-off communities, are often, where the more polluting companies end up, where the, sadly, often military bases, et cetera, are placed. It established a broad-based multilingual public education program on PFAS to make sure that those whose first language is not English learn about these dangers. I know parts of Ayer are environmental justice communities, so this is something that I think would be really important for Ayer and many other parts of the district I represent. So that's the legislation that's been filed. Lori mentioned I serve as the Senate Vice Chair of the Joint Committee on Environment and Natural Resources, the ENR committee. So the bill is going, I believe, to that committee. So I will be advocating for this bill. I think because of all the work by the task force last session, I do feel confident the legislature will take action. But the session, it's a 2-year session, so it has to happen in between now and next July, so next July 31st, 2024. And there's obviously additional actions the DEP can take. I mentioned that funding. One of the things that I'm the lead on in the Senate is increasing the DEP's funding for enforcement. The reality is, unless you have a robust enforcement agency, often these problems will fall through the cracks. That's really what happened, and you could see that from Dr. Shader's presentation, where where unfortunately the EPA fell down on this for a while. I am proud of the DEP, but I think they do need more funding. They need more staff to get out to all communities. So that's something we'll continue to advocate for. So that's the main legislation. As Lori had mentioned, there are other bills that have been filed. So I think it's really important for everyone here is if you have suggestions, if you have ideas, whether to strengthen this bill or other things the legislature needs to do, please be in touch with myself or Representative Sina as your legislators representing Ayer and more broadly the Neshoba Valley. So thanks so much, and I look forward to more of the presentation. Thank you.
As Dan is coming to the podium, Laura Spark is from Clean Water Action, if you want to just wave. She came a bit late. There are some wonderful handouts that summarize what Senator Eldridge was just speaking of. In addition to that, we're going to conclude with giving you some information on how you can write some testimony. It could be very brief. You can send that in. It's instructions on how to go about doing that to be able to support this important legislation. We want to make sure everybody has that, so you can't go home tonight feeling like you can do something.
And I just have one quick correction. The bill is going to the public
You have
health.
to come up here.
Public health, sorry. Okay, thank you.
Are you going to pass that now? Yeah, go ahead.
Well, good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for the introduction, and I want to thank Pace or the group that, if you're the founder or leading the group. Certainly, this is so important that we keep the information available to the public. Sometimes as an immigrant, sometimes when we come, we might not know all the issues that is happening, and I think local events like this, it's so important that we pass information along. I had my staff help me put some slides together just to facilitate. Sometimes I'm a very visual learner, and I sometimes I find it much easier to explain this bill. Is the clicker working? Sure.
I think there's just an arrow to go to the next slide.
Yeah. Very good. This was back in the winter. Congresswoman Laura Trahan brought some big track presentation. It was actually some funds from the federal government that helped pay for some of the new equipment that was done in town. And I know some of the members of the town was there. So that was a great event to be in. But I think the Senate was in session at the time. I remember saying that I was just everywhere with me, but no picture. The next slide, basically, it's a bill that we worked very closely with the Health Foundation. There were issues with private waters being contaminated in private wells, and there was a case in Boxburg that became almost a face as to why this bill is so important. There was a family who was drinking their private water and was contaminated with high levels of uranium. And you imagine, you think about all the health impacts that the family has to go through. So ways that we can combat this bill basically would, make sure that's the right, yeah. So when there's a sales and a purchase of a home, when there's a Title V that needs to be done for the sewer, for the septic system, this bill would mirror that. It would require the owner of the property to have the water tested. So basically, the new owner of the house can find out whether or not that water is safe to drink. And there were some concerns about the cost to implement such a bill. And through the work with the Health Foundation, they have given us a range. It could cost $100 to treat the water, and it could cost as much as $10,000. But the point here is that we want to make sure people are aware of the quality of the drinking water. And I think that's why we want to file this bill and hopefully be able to pass it. I think we have a lot of support in the House and in the Senate. Any questions on this bill? I know there's a question at the end, but I do have to leave soon, and I would rather take some questions now if you have it, and certainly very quickly. And the next bill, Senator Eldridge actually touched upon, which was Rep. Hogan's legislation with Senator Ayer. And these bills, there's some data there in terms of the food packaging by 2026 and consumer products by 2030. I will say that presentation, some of the stuff I kind of knew because we listened here and here again. The Spring Institute came to the State House even before COVID, gave a presentation, and I was very upset and disturbed with the numbers of breast cancer, perhaps in Cape Cod, some of those areas, so because of the contamination. And we as elected officials, we're not experts. I'm not a scientist. I rely on presentations like the one we just saw, and working with foundations to make sure we have a bill that is strong and that addresses the concern of the community and the public. And certainly, this bill, I'm not a co-sponsor, I'm not a sponsor, I'm a co-sponsor of it, but the other bill that we filed, we can certainly find ways to improve it upon each session. And the next slide is my contact information here. So if you do have any feedback as to how we can improve this piece of legislation, I know this was more designed on PFAS. I had initially sent a slide of growing up in Brazil where the water was being contaminated with sewer, private, where people were building homes next to a river and they were putting the water, and I was like, oh wow, send that video because actually I want everyone to see. But since it's more related to PFAS, I didn't include it. But for me, it was being an 8 or 10-year-old, seeing witnessing the crime that we're doing to the environment at moments, and that's why we need to take action to protect all kinds of natural resources, and including water, so valuable. So with that, I just want to say thank you.
Well, we've had some really good, solid presentations. We're going to take a few minutes right now for questions and answers on the previous presentations. I think a couple of people have chatted in a couple of messages as well. Do we need to have people come up here to ask their questions?
Sure, let's do that.
Yeah, you'll be more clear for everybody if you can come up here to ask any questions that you may have.
I can ask a chat question.
Yeah, can you come up here and read it?
Yeah.
This is Emily.
Hi, I'm Emily. So this is a question from Charlotte in the chat. I have a question maybe for the legislators. Do they think it is reasonable for individual towns to implement an accelerated timeline for phasing out PFAS in municipal purchasing relative to the timeline outlined in state legislation H 2197 that I believe you just mentioned? For example, in school cafeteria, single-use consumables and food packaging. So I'd like to take that on. And if you need me to repeat it, let me know.
Absolutely. Should I stand over here so you can?
I think you have to go back to the podium.
Yes, okay. Sorry. A lot of mics here.
Yeah.
Yeah, so thanks for that question. So certainly individual cities and towns, school districts could take action to do that. I do think this is something that needs state action because obviously, all of these products are crossing, municipal boundaries each and every day. But certainly cities and towns could show leadership to do that, to say we're no longer going to purchase products with PFAS. But I do think, statewide legislation is really what we need here in Massachusetts. But often Massachusetts being, a home rule state, local action can apply more pressure on the legislature and the government to take action. So that's my response.
I actually have a question that I think goes to Laurel. It's kind of a two-part question. In the various research studies that you are now aware of, and I know this is always changing, exposures to PFAS seem to impact ADHD and what's the other one that starts with an A? Autism issues. The other question is, you mentioned that plastics have PFAS in them. lots of people that I talked to during the study are telling me that they drink their water, they buy their water in plastic bottles. I also drink refillable containers, and I refill my plastic bottles. Am I exposing myself to PFAS?
As always, you're asking good questions, Lori. And we'll hear more about the CDC-funded study later from Emily. So we'll talk a little bit about the components of that. So to the question about ADHD and autism, that's one of the questions that we're really trying to answer through the study. I don't know how much evidence there is currently on that, but by including children, including here in Ayer, we'll be able to get some more insight into that. It's a concern, but I don't know that there's really a lot of strong evidence for that yet, but not a lot of study on it either way. In terms of which plastics do or don't have PFAS, like it's sort of a new thing to me because I used to think like, well, plastics won't have PFAS because it's plastic, that it's already waterproof, and that. So it was sort of just over the past year, I think a lot of people have become aware that certain plastics may have PFAS. I don't think it's every type of plastic. The way that at least that I started to hear about it, was that there was a study of pesticides, and I think it was the state DEP and EPA had discovered some containers of pesticides that had PFAS, and the manufacturer said, well, we're not adding PFAS, although some pesticides do have PFAS. Anyways, it seemed like it was coming from the containers, and so those were containers where the polyethylene plastic had this reaction between the fluorine gas that makes the plastic more inert. So my guess is for our water bottle, which doesn't have to be, super strong and lasts for a long time, it's probably not fluorinated. I could go on like a whole separate spiel about all the problems with bottled water and the other types of chemicals that leach out of plastic and the sort of like issues of sustainability, because water is heavy and it takes a lot of resources to move water around. So in general, we do recommend, if here in Ayer, the water is being treated for PFAS, but in other areas, or if there are other water quality concerns, that people get their water tested, that they figure out what the issue is and do treatment in the home rather than getting bottled water. Bottled water falls under the FDA, not under the EPA. There's very little testing, very little enforcement. So even if it has a pretty picture of a pristine place, there's not really a guarantee that the water has any better quality than what's coming out of your tap. And tap water undergoes a lot more testing.
Just a follow-up question, very quick. Can you just talk about what you mean by water treatment in the home? What would that look like?
Sure.
Repeat the question.
Repeat the question. Sure. So it's a question about water treatment in the home, and maybe are you asking for PFAS, like what types of treatment can remove PFAS from tap water? So typically for home-based treatments, there's two general types of treatment. So there's activated carbon. Activated carbon can be granular activated carbon, so maybe like a filter pitcher, little like black charcoal pieces. There's also solid carbon block filters. You might have that in your fridge, door, water faucet, or a spigot under your sink. And activated carbon does do a good job of removing the long chain PFAS. The shorter chain PFAS may not always be as well removed, especially over the sort of lifetime of a filter. And then there's also a reverse osmosis system, which in general does a better job of removing both short and long chain PFAS. That would be something that you would do like at the point of use, not for your whole house. So again, it's important to get your water tested and to understand what's in the water. If there's a different water quality issue, maybe PFAS isn't high and you have a nitrate issue or something else, then you would want a different type of treatment, because no one filter can remove everything. So it's always important to know what you're trying to treat for.
Go ahead.
So I live in Ayer, I'm drinking Ayer town water. Do I still need to filter my drinking water?
So a person who lives in Ayer wants to know if she should be filtering her tap water. For PFAS, the water is already being filtered for PFAS by the water supply, and you'll hear about that from the Department of Public Works. So it's been great to see the town be really proactive and be ahead of the regulations in terms of treating the water. In terms of other issues, I've mostly been focused on PFAS myself. Sometimes we do recommend if a water system is being there is disinfection, that there can be disinfection byproducts that form, and so having a carbon filter can remove those as sort of like an extra barrier at the point of use. But
Just a real quick follow-up I wanted to. When you say microwave popcorn, are we talking about the stuff in the bags, or using a container to microwave popcorn?
oh, it's like the stuff, the bags that have all they add PFAS to the bags, especially when it's all buttery and greasy, so that your hands don't get greasy from it. If you can just like microwave popcorn in a brown bag, and that's fine. It's the stuff they add to the bags. Most microwave popcorn bags do have PFAS. There are some eco-friendly ones. Maybe you could find it somewhere like Whole Foods, but for the most part, if it doesn't say it doesn't have PFAS, I would assume it does.
I know it's,
I think you need to leave, so.
it's okay, but I like the topic. So question in regards to, sometimes you come from Brazil, you drink a lot of coffee, and they put coffee in their styrofoam, and hot coffee. And could you talk to any study done in terms of, chemicals being released from those styrofoam cups and putting hot liquid in there?
I don't know as much about what's in styrofoam cups. I don't think they have PFAS, but anything like that, plasticky, I try to stay away from, because there can be, usually plastics are sort of like made from small building blocks that make big molecules, but sometimes those like smaller building blocks can come out, and there can be other chemicals that are added. So in general, styrofoam and plastics, I do try to stay away from, both from avoiding my exposure personally, but just for the whole life cycle, the issues related to where the chemicals are manufactured, and then what do you do with your cup?
Couple more questions? Yeah, in the end
I
first.
have two questions. The first one is, the legislature, thank you, is trying to decrease the amount of the chemical, pushing with new laws that will decrease the amount of chemical. However, somebody just said at the beginning, oh, if you are a consumer, I'm a consumer, I don't want to buy some product. It's not, I don't have any power that it will change how the company continue producing the product. So, is there some federal laws that they are working on? Because me, I'm very marginal, one person. But is there regulation in the federal law that they can also push beside our state? Or are we just working along our state, no more central, so it can for everyone?
I would say at the state
Love
level,
this, come here
the
and
bill.
answer.
Can you put the slide back up? The proponent bill. I mean, it does have. The PowerPoint doesn't show all the specifics that it's going to be removed. It's a little general, but it's a good bill to support because it's going to protect the consumer and certainly, hopefully, minimize some of the impact of PFAS. At least at the state level, that's a good bill that we're working on, and there's momentum. I know Senator Eldridge mentioned that it's 2026 or 2030, and that's certainly it's so long from now. But I think we need to make those progress now, just to minimize the impact.
But are those the federal laws also trying to work in the same?
I'm sure there are federal legislations that we could be lobbying and supporting, and that's maybe something we could work with our delegation at the federal level and ask which bills would address these concerns, and we could certainly be, working with them, even though we're separate, powers, but we can certainly be educating people like you to support those bills. And one thing you can do when those bills come to a hearing, you can come and testify in any committee, send a letter. And I know sometimes it's a very short notice, sometimes it's a week or two, but everything is posted on the website. So certainly that's a way to, and if you are a member of some of these organizations, they will notify when there's a bill, if there's a bill coming up for a hearing. So I think that's why it's so important to be active in some of those.
And the second question is, you're pushing companies to decrease the amount of this chemical in the product that they make. However, is the state of Massachusetts trying to promote universities made to come with better ideas, because there is where the engineering department, agricultural, etc., try to promote more products that are friendly with the environment and also with our health. are you trying to do something like to promote that? Maybe
Yeah.
that's another way to go.
Yeah, no, and that's a great advice. Jim,
And I'll just join in and add.
Because if we wait for the companies to do something, really, we are going to die.
Yeah, so the question about universities, and actually UMass Lowell has the Toxic Use Reduction Institute, TURI, which works with companies to find non-toxic alternatives for products. So I don't know specifically if they work on PFAS, I assume that they are, but they certainly work to eliminate other toxic chemicals from consumer products. So we, given all the academic institutions we have here, I think there probably is a lot of work being done. I don't know specifically about them.
Maybe you as a senator can try to promote a little more of that. I don't know
Yeah.
if that could be done. I mean, we have wonderful universities here that I'm sure will be
Absolutely.
really willing to contribute to the state to improve this.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. So I will certainly be advocating together we'll advocate with universities to do more work on this.
Thank you.
I think we have time for just one more question, and then we're going to go on. Go ahead.
It originally said that the PFAS came from Teflon and the coatings on them. So I have some pots that have coatings on them now. Does that mean automatically that we should not be using any kind of cookware with
Can you repeat the question, Laurel, to the audience?
Yeah, this is one of those like really hard to answer questions because there's not really a good answer. So you're wondering what to do with the Teflon pan that you already have?
I don't know if it's Teflon. I only know that it's
The coated pan.
it's a pan, a good pan, and it has some kind of a coated surface on it.
Right, so what to do with a product that has maybe like a nonstick pan, but could be coated in PFAS, you're not sure. I find this a hard question to answer. Definitely, I try not to buy any new ones, right? But in terms of something that you already have, I think when you maybe get a brand new Teflon pan, it's possible there might be some PFAS that aren't like totally bound into the pan, and you get those would be released like right at the beginning of having a new pan, and at the end of the lifetime of the pan, it starts to like scratch off and all that. You don't want to keep using it at that point. But if you have just a Teflon pan, you don't overheat it. It is a concern if you overheat it because it can create fumes that are they're really toxic to birds. Someday I want someone to explain to me why birds are particularly sensitive, but it can't be good for us either. But if you're not overheating it and you are already using it, my guess would be that you wouldn't really be getting a lot of PFAS exposure from using a pan kind of in the middle of its lifetime. And then it's always hard to know like what's the most ethical thing to do with a pan after its useful life. Or what if you say like, oh, I don't want my stain-resistant couch anymore because I don't want PFAS, or I don't want the flame retardants in it. Like, what to do with it? Is it if I'm getting something out of my house because I think it's toxic, I don't want to necessarily bring it to a second-hand store, so you're passing it along to someone else. I don't know. It's complicated. There's a lot of resources that go into making a new version of anything. So I guess that's a long way of saying like probably not a lot of PFAS exposure from a just Teflon pan that's in good condition. Try not to buy any new ones. And the disposal issues are just a big challenge that people are really struggling to work out.
Big issue. I'll just add that I've noticed that if you're paying attention, you can start to buy pans that are labeled as PFOA free. That's one chemical that they're not using. What about all the other fluoridated compounds that could be in there? You've got to find something that's fluoridated free. So there's a lot of sort of tricky things that are going on. You do have to be careful, and I agree. I have several scratched up Teflon pans, and I don't want to throw them out. I'm not going to give them to anybody. I don't know what to do with them. So, right now I use them on displays for our outreach work. All right, thank you. We're going to move on to our next speaker, Kimberly Abraham. She's a relatively new employee in Ayer. Kimberly is our town of Ayer's water and sewer superintendent. She has a bachelor's degree from Clark University in environmental science and policy. She has formerly worked in Worcester and Somerville. She holds a distribution grade 4 and a treatment grade 2 water operator's licenses, and is currently serving on the board of directors for the Massachusetts Waterworks Association. Please join me in welcoming Kimberly.
Thank you, Lori. Thanks. This is a great crowd. Thanks to everybody who's come today. Let's see. Okay, so like Lori said, I am pretty new. I've been with the town of Ayer for just over a year, so I've come in on the tail end of this PFAS journey. But I am so excited to be here today to be able to give you this brief history, which starts with the 2016, where PFAS was first tested for and discovered in some of our wells. In 2018, temporary treatment of well 8. So well 8 is the well that's closest to dead ends that had the highest levels of PFAS. 2020 is when the permanent treatment at Grove Pond began, and that was, I want to actually do a big shout out to Mark Wexel, who's not here. He really pioneered this progress in the town, and also Greg Cormier, who's our water foreman. He has been the one operating these treatment plants and with all of the challenges, and he's really embraced it, and because of them, we've got, as of 2020, permanent treatment, and lastly, in 2022, permanent treatment at our second Spectacle Pond well field began. This is Grove Pond Treatment Plant, so it was an addition to the existing treatment facility. You can see the outside shell of the treatment facility, and inside those are the vessels that are the resin on the inside that is treating the PFAS compounds. So full automatic operation in November of 2020. We did have a media change out in November and December 2022. And we're still trying to understand the full annual operations and maintenance costs of these facilities. This is the Spectacle Pond Treatment Plant, full automatic operation in August of 2022. And again, we're still trying to understand the full annual operations and maintenance costs. So you can see that, again, these were add-ons to the existing treatment facilities. They are large vessels. So at Spectacle Pond, we're using GAC, granulated activated carbon. At the Grove Pond, we're using, I think I mentioned, we're using a resin. So 2 different treatments for 2 different treatment plants. So water quality results. So since July of 22, all finished water leaving both facilities are PFAS free. They're either non-detect or non-reportable, and so we're really proud to be able to report that. Any other detectable unregulated PFAS compounds, because in the state of Massachusetts there's 6 compounds that are regulated, and like as been told, there's over 14,000 compounds. So 6 of them are regulated. Any unregulated compounds are being reported in our water quality report, and that's available on our website. Additional testing of unregulated PFAS is underway. All detections will again be reported, so an additional 29 are being tested for it. This UCMR, it's called unregulated contaminated. UCMR, unregulated contaminated monitoring rule. So it's been a real challenge. The regulatory targets keep changing. When we was first detected, the EPA had a advisory of 70 parts per trillion. So we built the treatment plant with that in mind. Then the levels went down to 20 parts per trillion, and now you've probably heard the EPA has new health advisories out there, so bring the levels down to 4 parts per trillion. So we're monitoring it very closely. We're staying on top of it, and we're just very happy to report that the levels are non-detect and non-reportable. So it's really great. We do have on our website, there's under air, under water, there's a PFAS tab, and you can get a full history of all the things that the town has done, and every quarter I'm putting up updates on how we are with testing and any other pertinent information related to PFAS as the science changes, as treatment changes, as regulations change. I'm trying to keep everybody as informed as possible. I'm also always available, calling the town DPW. You can get in touch with me. I'm available. You can email me directly through the website if you've got any questions. I'm here now if you have any questions. But that's pretty much it. I just want to thank you guys very much.
We're going to have questions after the next speaker, because we can hold your question for just a moment. We appreciate it. Thank you. I just wanted to add that the sources of PFAS at the Grove Pond wells is not the same as the one at Speck Pond. They're completely different aquifers. They're not connected at all. So the one at Grove Pond we know came from the Army's, mainly from work from the firefighting foam that the Army was required to use. So you're clear the military has been required to use this high-end firefighting foam for a long time. It's called AFFF, that's the abbreviation. And it works better for gas and oil fires. That's why they were required to use it. It's more expensive. So many places that are near a military site have this problem. The source at Speck Pond is coming from some of the industries, maybe several industries around that end of town, so next to Littleton. Interestingly enough, the other end, the northern end of Speck Pond has the Littleton wells on it. They also have PFAS there, but it's not the same as ours. So they call it the fingerprinting. The chemical fingerprinting is not the same. So we have different sources, and we don't really know yet. I've heard DEP call it the PFAS soup is down in our groundwater. So that's an issue. So our final speaker for the evening is Emily Heckel. And Emily has been working really hard as our study coordinator. She has a short presentation to catch you up on what's going on with the health study. Emily is the study coordinator for the MA PFAS in Your Health study, as most of you know. Emily has a background in public health and clinical research. She has a master's degree in public health from Johns Hopkins University with a concentration in environmental health. And she's done amazing work coordinating so many loose ends and pieces of this study. Emily, would you like to come forward? Please help me give you a round of applause.
Hi everyone, thanks for the introduction. I am new to the Ayer community. I've been working here since about August of last year on this project, and I just wanted to say it's been really fantastic to meet everybody who's come in for their study office visits, and it's incredible to me just how much people know about the PFAS issues in the community. I've learned so much from people coming in that I didn't know before about PFAS and specifically in Ayer. And it's just been, I'm very grateful to be a part of the project. So I'll just be talking a little bit about the multi-site study, which is the study underway in Ayer that I think many are aware of. Just give some updates on how we're doing and a little bit of background for for those unfamiliar. So this is just a little bit about PFAS exposure and health concerns, kind of why we're doing this study. So PFAS exposures are very common. They've actually been detected in over 99% of Americans. So all of us are exposed to PFAS on some level. These are just some of the health effects associated with PFAS, and some of these have more or less evidence. So one of the things that we're doing for the study is to try to just look at health outcomes and provide more evidence of the relationship between PFAS and different health outcomes. Some of the common ones here are elevated cholesterol, thyroid issues, different types of cancer, specifically kidney and testicular cancer. There's some developmental effects as well as decreased birth weight, changes in liver enzymes. There's some immunosystem toxicity, including decreased vaccine response. So that's something that we're looking at actually here in Massachusetts specifically to see if there's a relationship between vaccine efficacy and PFAS exposure. This is just an example. There's just a wide range of things that we're looking at and that have been previously linked to PFAS exposures. So this is just a map showing all the different sites that are part of the multi-site health study. So this is a study that's funded and coordinated by the CDC and specifically ATSDR, which is sort of like I guess the toxic chemicals stepchild of the CDC. They're related to one another. But we can just go with CDC. There's 7 states, including Massachusetts, and each of the states is looking at 1 or 2 communities who've been affected by PFAS, specifically in drinking water. So there's communities across the country, similar to Ayer, who've had PFAS contamination in the drinking water. This is just an example of, there's 7 states and just a handful of sites. We obviously have not been able to study every town that's faced this issue, but we're hoping that by looking at a range of populations and a range of communities, we'll be able to get some really good information that could contribute towards regulations in the future. So just you can kind of see Massachusetts, New York, New Jersey, California, it's just kind of a wide range of different areas. And at the bottom we have our goal of 7,000 adults and 2,100 children in communities across 7 states. So we're hoping to maybe not reach that goal, but we're hoping to come as close as we possibly can. Again, this is just kind of a bit about why the study is important. We have gaps in the knowledge of the full range of health effects of PFAS chemicals. Part of the reason is that we just haven't studied it on this scale before, and when you do these large-scale epidemiological studies and you've got a large sample size, you're able to kind of show more definitively that certain health effects are related to PFAS. Rather than related to something else. Whereas if you study a really small sample, you can't really make those kinds of statements. So that's why a study of this scale is really important in terms of providing evidence of the harm that PFAS is causing. The findings that we hope that the findings will support the development of future drinking water standards and regulation. I am very hopeful that that will be the case once we kind of wrap up our data collection, and there's a process afterwards where we analyze the data and we'll publish manuscripts, and that information will be communicated to the general public in various ways. We also hope that it will have an effect on drinking water regulation. Ayer is just one of many towns that was selected to be a part of this national research project. This is just a bit about the scope of our study. So here in Massachusetts, we have 2 communities. We have one study site here in Ayer, and then we have another site in Hyannis on the Cape. Laura was talking a bit about the work that she's done over the years on the Cape with drinking water. So Hyannis began recruiting for the study in the fall of 2021. They have a little bit of a bigger community, so their goal is 700 adults and 200 children, and then here in Ayer, we began recruiting in fall of 2022, and we have a goal of 300 adults and 100 children. And that's just a map of the different towns. So this is kind of just some information about who's eligible to participate. So I know we have some folks here who are from Ayer, and some of you are not from Ayer. You have to be from Ayer to participate in this particular study. This is just some of the requirements. You have to have lived in Ayer between May 2006 and February 2018, and that's for any amount of time. So, if you've only been here a few months during that time, you're still eligible to participate. This is for children, again, the same dates, and also children if their birth mothers lived in Ayer during that time prior to the child's birth. Multiple members of the same household can participate. We encourage that. And former residents of Ayer are eligible. So if any of you formerly lived in Ayer and moved to a neighboring community, you're welcome to come back and participate. Or if you know anybody who used to live in Ayer during that time, we welcome people to come back and participate in the study. Firefighters and those who are exposed to PFAS through their work are unfortunately not eligible for this particular study. And the reason for that is because we want to demonstrate really clearly that the drinking water, the PFAS exposure from the drinking water is causing these health effects. And if we have, people in the study who have exposures to PFAS from, say, their work, in particular, you mentioned firefighting because, as Laura was talking about, the AFFF foam is a source of PFAS exposure. That's just kind of throws off our overall results. It's not that we don't want to include people, but just to kind of explain that, and I'm happy to answer any questions that anyone has about that. This is just some examples of what you would do if you were to participate in this study. We have a study office visit where you come in and give a blood sample. I'd like to, if anyone who's been in the study before, you may have gone down to the phlebotomy lab in the hospital to do your blood draw. We have our own phlebotomist in our office now, so it's been, I think the visits have been shorter. I think there was definitely a time where it was taking a while to like troop kids down to get their blood drawn in the lab, and it's been, I think, just a quicker process. So for anyone who's, been hearing about that or has kids or friends with kids who would like to join the study, the visits are going a little bit quicker. We provide a urine sample, we listed your medications, some basic health information, and we do some body measurements. So you can kind of see here, we've got kids in our hygienist office who are getting body measurements done. And then after the visit, you do a questionnaire over the phone where we ask you about medical conditions, residential and work history, and water consumption. The third piece of the study is a neurobehavioral assessment, and that's only for children. And that's, I think we were talking about earlier, Lori was mentioning the possible relationship between PFAS and things like autism and ADHD. So we don't have a ton of evidence to support necessarily that relationship right now, but we're hoping in this study to kind of move in that direction. So that's the neurobehavioral piece. What are we testing for? We're looking for PFAS in blood, and everybody who participates in the study will receive that result. We also do routine lab tests, and this will just be markers of cholesterol, blood sugar, thyroid hormones, sex hormones, liver and kidney function, and antibodies. So a lot of those are lab tests that you might receive from your doctor, but we do provide them. So if you get the results from the study, it's something that you can show your doctor and then possibly not have to repeat the test. It's kind of a nice little benefit as well. The results of your PFAS levels, so this is just kind of what you'll receive as a participant. Everybody will receive their PFAS blood level result. It does take a little while to kind of get those back since we send all the samples to the CDC labs in Georgia, and they kind of batch them together and analyze them. But we're just actually starting to send some results out to our hiatus participants. So it takes a little while, but you do eventually get like a packet that shows your results and kind of how it fits in with the results in your community, and as well as within the U.S. So you'll kind of get some explanation of the results and then some information for how to maybe bring stuff up to your doctor. Satisfaction of being part of a major study on chemicals is a definite benefit. I think it'll be interesting to see as our results are publicized in the media. You'll probably read articles about the study, and you can say, I participated and contributed to that. So that's pretty cool. We give gift cards for completing all parts of the study, so it's $25 for each piece of the study. Adults can receive up to $50 for doing their blood draw and their questionnaire, and for children up to $75 for completing the neurobehavioral testing. This is just a little snapshot of where we're at right now. So this is how many people have come in for their study office visit. We're looking to recruit 300 adults into the study. We're 68% of the way there, which is very exciting to me since we didn't have a ton of time. So we just started in November, and we're past the halfway mark. For children, our target is 100. We're currently 30% of the way there. So we really would love to get some more children into the study. It's important to get a snapshot of what these health outcomes look like in kids as well as adults. And so if you're considering bringing your children in, or if you have friends and family in the area with children, I'm happy to answer any questions about what that experience is like for the kids as well, since I know it's not like coming in to get your kids' blood drawn it's not like a small matter. So and some of them do they often do great. I'm surprised how well the kids do. They come in and they're just kind of like, all right, let's do it. But yeah, it's not always easy. So anyways, happy to answer questions about that. But we are definitely looking to get more children in before the end of the summer. This is kind of just comparing kind of where we're at with our recruitment to the other sites. We're about in the middle, and I just would like to say, I don't have it on the slide this time, but we all have the same goals, even though our populations are very different in these different communities. So it looks like we're right in the middle. I think we're doing a little bit better than that. And this is just for, if the numbers look a bit different, this is for folks who completed all parts of the study, including their questionnaires. We have, Pennsylvania is obviously done very well. But Let's see, and that's about all I have. To learn more about the study, I just put down our phone number, our email address, and a website. And if you would like to give us your information, you can check in with Lizzie on your way out. Lizzie is our lovely summer intern, and she's been helping us with outreach and screening people over the phone. If you would like to participate, there is a phone screen that we have to do, and it's, I wish it was more of a condensed process that you could fill it online or something, but this is what happens when you're funded by the CDC and you all have to kind of follow the same rules. We do have to do an eligibility phone screen, but Lizzie makes it very easy, and she'll get you through as quick as she can. You can feel free to text us with questions, email us with questions. It's just a little picture of our office. This is like it's a medical office building next to the hospital, right down the street. And if anybody is not from Ayer, and if you're interested in resources about PFAS exposure, Lizzie can provide some handouts about that as well. If you're interested in getting a blood test, but you're not eligible for the study. So that's about all I have. And we'll go on to questions, I think.
So I heard a rumor that if people happen to be traveling out to the Cape and they want to have their PFAS study done out there, if you want to have your blood work or urine sample done out there, there's more room on the Cape than there is in the Ayer location. Yes. So talk to her. She'll let people is that.
One thing I meant to include, sorry, Lori. We'd encourage everyone to sign up. Our participant slots are actually really filling up fast. So if you were considering participating, if you're on the fence, if you have questions, reach out to us. We are enrolling through mid-September, which is coming up sooner than we all think. And especially if you want those early morning appointments where you don't want to fast for too long, give us a call and get signed up. Tell your friends, tell your families, just wanted to make sure that everyone gets in that wants to participate.
So the appointments are being filled through August right now, so get on the list soon if you want to participate, especially children. We really need children to be involved. And then I wanted to mention, I was one of the first people that had this done. The results from the blood tests are really comprehensive. I've never ever had a blood test done that's thorough. It was really informative. I shared it with my doctor, and we're paying attention to a couple of things that we weren't realizing was kind of an issue with me. So I encourage you to get involved. We're going to pause and take a couple of questions now. Connie, I know you had a question before, so this would be the time for that. I'm kind of keeping an eye on time. We're going to wrap up pretty soon. A couple more questions. You want to speak?
My question was for the superintendent.
Okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
You mentioned that with the new carbon filtration system for the PFAS, that you're still trying to get a kind of a grip on costs and where that's all going. I know before we even knew there was PFAS, we had green sand that we were using for filtration purposes, and there's limited sources of that. Has any thought been given to doing the reverse osmosis, which Pepsi uses, and which I think you mentioned, or one of the speakers mentioned, can take PFAS out of the water? Or are we too far down the line and too committed to the processes that we now have?
That's a very good question.
Can you repeat the question?
Oh, sorry. Sure. So the question is whether we would consider reverse osmosis as a treatment process in our treatment plants. I believe that we are too far down the line. I believe that because I'm so new to Ayer, so there was a thorough pilot study done to determine what the best treatment options were for the town. And so I don't know for a fact whether reverse osmosis was a candidate, but I would like to think that everything was on the table at the time.
Well, it's, if in fact the cost of green sand and the carbon that's needed for filtration is an ongoing cost. I don't know that you have those costs with reverse osmosis. I mean, I don't exactly know what the hell reverse osmosis is, but it doesn't sound like it uses green sand or carbon.
No, but it's not free, I'm not really, I don't know if I'm the best person to speak about reverse osmosis, but my understanding is it actually uses a lot of water in order to make water.
I see. Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
I can just, you can answer that?
No, I was gonna ask another question.
Oh, okay. I was just gonna add that part of Littleton did use reverse osmosis for quite some time, and it does become very expensive. But my understanding was that because we have lots of other like iron and manganese in our water, that the reverse osmosis would get clogged up really quickly, and it wasn't very effective for our situation.
So there was another question for you, and I think one of the questions did get answered already. So one was, what was the source of the PFAS contamination? So Lori already answered that, and the question about the level of contamination, I would recommend to go to the Ayer website, because all the water test results are on there. But there's a question about what happens to the contaminated media from the contaminated, or from the treatment plants.
That's a very good question.
That is a good question.
That's a really good question. And I don't have a good answer for you. So right now, it gets trucked away, and whether it gets landfilled or it gets, there's talk out there of regenerating the material, but it's not, the science isn't quite there yet on being able to regenerate the material. So I think the best option we have to us right now is landfilling.
And I have a question. Over by Roll Pond, there's a lot of heavy industry over there. And over on Scully Road, there's high levels of arsenic. Is that being addressed as part of this or at all?
We do test for arsenic in the raw water, and we test for it in the finished. Oh, I'm sorry, let me repeat the question. So the question is whether arsenic is also an issue in our drinking water. Is that fair to?
But also the whole area has heavy industry. So I mean, the PFAS may not just be coming from the port. But there is high arsenic over there. Is that part of this? I mean, is that an option?
Okay.
That's a really good question. So to repeat the question, we're wondering where the water comes from, and are the areas on Scully Road contaminating our water? The Roe Pond water supply is upstream from Scully Road and the landfill that causes the arsenic contamination. We do have arsenic in the raw water, but it's being removed by green sand filtration, I think, first.
That's correct.
And the levels were low. They were found quite some time ago. The arsenic that's leaching out of Shepley's Hill landfill is very high. That's one of the things PACE has been watching for a long time. It's going underneath West Main Street, which is at the far end of where Grove Pond wells are. So Grove Pond wells are kind of, we're off of Barnum Road, right near the community garden. So the water is flowing from that area toward the National River in the other direction. So arsenic is a natural mineral that is in a lot of soils in our area. Many private wells in Harvard also have arsenic in their drinking water in their private wells, and they have to treat their water at home. So in our case, part of it could be coming from what the Army has done over the years. Part of it could be natural, we don't know, but it is being filtered. That's a really good question. Other questions? Oh, Jeff.
Yeah. So a question for Ms. Abraham. You said that the levels of PFAS from the well or post-processing are unreportable or undetectable, and I'm wondering how sensitive is the process that you're using to detect those levels? Would they detect to a level of 20 parts per trillion, 10 parts, 4 parts, 1 part?
Sure. So the question is basically, what is the detection limit of the analysis being done? And so the answer to that is 2 parts per trillion.
Thank you.
Can I ask a question about the study?
Of Cindy?
The
Oh,
study.
sure, yes.
I just wanted to know what the fine print is on the privacy if someone signs up for the study.
Privacy issues?
Yeah.
Good question. We get that a lot. Emily or Laurel,
sure.
can you address privacy issues?
Yes, I can address that.
A lot of people ask that. That's a good question.
Could you repeat the question, please?
I was just wondering, when people ask you, well, what's the privacy issues with the study?
Yeah.
What's the limits?
Oh, sure, yeah, that's a good question. So we keep information confidential in terms of like, we protect your privacy using like a code instead of your name. So everybody has a study ID, and we keep our information in a confidential HIPAA compliant database. As far as things like storing or using and storing like blood samples and things like that, is that kind of part of your question?
I think in my particular household, there's a lot of people that watch a lot of CSI. And they're just like, like make sure that they're not ongoing test. Is there ongoing testing?
Oh, sure, yeah, that's a great question. I can answer that. So there are a lot of options in our consent forms for what you would like us to do with your samples. That's something that like I haven't actually seen in a lot of other studies, but I think they wanted to make it really accessible to people with privacy concerns. Not everybody wants CDC to have your blood sample to do whatever they want with, even if it's testing for chemicals. So you can actually check a box on the form, like if you want to just do the study and then have them, destroy your samples afterwards. You just want to get, you want to contribute to this study and the study only, that's an option. If you're okay with having your samples stored and used for other tests on chemicals, then you can check that box. And then if you're okay with having your samples stored for, tests not on PFAS chemicals, you can check that box. So it's really, they do kind of provide options. And I would just encourage everyone to check the option that's best for you. It's completely your decision. And if you'd like to participate and you don't want your samples stored, it's still, very valuable to have to have you contribute. Thank you. Does that answer your question?
Yep. So hang on. So just to follow up on that, I get a lot of questions where people don't trust the government to have their data.
Yeah.
Is that protected?
Yes. So I'm trying to think how to I don't know how to get into too much of the legalese with that, but basically they have ways that they protect your data and store it, and so it's kind of I don't want to say that it's we can absolutely guarantee that there's never going to be a breach of privacy. We do everything that we can to store everybody's data in a confidential way. After the study is over, they basically disassociate your name and your information from your study data. So this is kind of what's done if you were to participate in a clinical trial or any other sort of study. Typically, we have your information so we can contact you, and we have links in our system so that we can say oh, this person's ID is this person's name if you have a question about your results, or we can try to schedule your visit. Once all of the logistics of that are wrapped up, there's no need to have that name associated with your results. So they basically can just separate those off, and there'll be a data set, which is just all of the aggregate data, and that will kind of just be on its own. So if others were to do research, others were to use the data set, like our other sites, since we eventually will combine all of the data, which is what gives us these really robust results that we hope can kind of create change. It will be a data set without a link to your name and phone number and all of that. Does that answer your question? I'm hoping that I did. Okay. Yeah. There's just so much involved in privacy, but I personally feel confident that we're doing a good job of separating people from the study data. And if there are any more specific questions, you can definitely reach out to us and I can provide more detailed answers.
Anybody else have any questions? I think we're ready for our closing slide. That's my little piece. So in closing, I want to encourage all of you to get involved in the study if you haven't. I'm guessing that many of you already have. Next one. Oh, I've got the thing in here, don't I? No, where do I go? Okay, yeah. This is the sheet that Laura Sparks from Clean Water Action brought for us, and I think there are extras. This is online as well. This summarizes the legislation that Senator Eldridge was discussing with us, and I encourage you all to follow up with the second sheet that tells you exactly how to go about sending in a testimony. And this is kind of a learning curve for me as well. I keep wanting to walk toward you. I'm not supposed to. I want to share kind of a funny story that Laura Sparks worked with us, and Laura and Laurel and myself all gave verbal testimony. We had a narrow window of time. One particular day, about 3 weeks ago, 2 weeks ago, something like that. We knew what day it was going to be on, and I happened to have a water chestnut poll planned for that day. Some of you know about this. So I typed up my testimony, put it in a Ziploc bag, took it out in the boat with me. I'm on my cell phone, listening to the presentations. It was going on and on. I'm running out of battery power on my phone. I'm waiting to be called. Laurel was called, then Laura was called, and I knew I was going to come up soon, but I was down to 7%. So I started rowing back to the shoreline to get back to where I could get power, and they called my name while I was right on the shoreline. And my phone was still in my water-protected thing, and they said, Lori Daring, it's your turn, and I couldn't get my phone out of the little bag, the water-protected bag quickly enough. So they went on to the next person, and then I said, wait, I'm here! And so I sat on the stairs where we're doing our water chestnut pull outside with my gear on and everything, giving my testimony. It was very short, they gave me 3 minutes. But anyhow, it was really exciting, and you guys all gave wonderful presentations too, so we all make a difference, that's my point. So please do follow up if you are concerned about this like we are. We need to get this stuff out of the world. We need to turn off the faucet. There should be another slide. Where is? There we go. Oh. There we go. Okay. So we do fun stuff too. I want you to get involved in PACE. We need you. Pat Lynch, you're here. She's our portrait. This is last year. The water chestnuts at the end of Grove Pond just filled the whole pond. We could not paddle through it last year. We got a late start because we had to do a whole bunch of water testing before we could get out there and pull the plants out. The water is pretty shallow, so we really have to pull them out by hand. There are machines that can do this, but we cannot get the machines in there. So this is last year. We got an early start this year. I'm going to show you, if it works, a little video. This is an area that we cleared, so you can get a sense of how contaminated it was on June 7th of this year. So that's all water chestnut plants. This is on the other side of the walking bridge. Does that play? This is the other side of the walking bridge. And the whole area has been filled in with water chestnuts. So all those plants are water chestnuts. Hoping to get it to you on Saturday to get this. Especially the left side was pretty filled in. And sadly, there were only 3 or 4 plants there last year. This is what happened in 1 year. So go to the, oh, I gotta do it here. Okay, so this is last Sunday. That's the same spot. There's one more video here, Andrew, if you can play it through, I hope. Give you an idea.
Today is July 9th, Sunday. Just finished with a crew. This was filled in just 4 hours ago with water chestnut. We cleared it. The whole thing.
We cleared it.
I'm so pleased.
So we have 3 sessions left. Thank you. It's taken a lot of people to do this. We had a crew of 14. They were so dedicated. It was just fantastic. So that was the group that day. We are doing some fun things. We're doing this water chestnut pull. We got $62,000 given to PACE to use as a fine, a settlement case that happened here in Ayer. Somebody had violated some surface water regulations, and we were selected from the AGO's office to receive $62,000. We need to use that money to do something to clean surface waters, and that's a great project we're looking forward to. We need more people to help us, so I'd love for you to get involved. As you walk out, Lizzie over there, want to wave? She's got all kinds of handouts, and there's a place for you to sign up to get information. We do have an active Facebook page. That's a great way to find out about what we're doing. We'd love to have your help. Thanks for coming tonight, everybody.